Whilst the phrase "there is just a small nipple gene" is amusing, it's not especially helpful. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to find great wild camping spots in the UK. I'll be going through all the apps and tools that I use when starting to plan a wild camp adventure, but more importantly I'll go through with you how I identify the differences between a good spot and a bad spot before I even leave the house. So first off, what do I mean by wild camping? Well, I simply mean camping without amenities, and for the purposes of stealth, in most cases, camping in a vehicle. In the vast majority of cases, this does mean on some public accessible land, often a car park, lay-by or similar, but not exclusively. Often little known air-style locations and even some wild specific campsites exist to provide a very similar experience, which are often worth considering, especially for longer stays. It is also critical to mention that you need to understand the legalities surrounding wild camping in the area that you're in. There is a lot of discussion online about this subject, so please do some more due diligence and research than just watching this video, but my interpretation, in short, is as follows. In Scotland, wild camping is largely more widely accepted than the rest of the UK due to a few unique pieces of legislation, including the right to roam. However, the portions of these legislations that lay mention to wild camping are said to be intended for the act of backpacking and trekking using small tents, bivy bags and that sort of thing, whilst exploring the Scottish tundra by foot. And as a result, haven't been written with a 35-foot Airstream motorhome in mind. So just something to keep in mind. So even in Scotland, keep in mind that whilst it may be considered acceptable in many instances, it may still be open to interpretation, and being asked to move on by local law enforcement is entirely likely. As for the rest of the UK, well, it is effectively disallowed in the sense that every bit of land is owned by someone, and theoretically you'd require permission on any piece of land to form a temporary dwelling, i.e. a campsite. That said, of course, if we break down the singular activities involved in a wild camp, the water's muddy very quickly. For instance, is there anything preventing people pulling into a lay-by whilst driving to stop for some food or a drink, or even just a rest? Well, no, absolutely not. In fact, that's why they're there, and those activities are carried out by thousands of lorries and truck drivers on our roads every day. The same, of course, can be said for taking a nap or even fully sleeping overnight until you feel able to continue your journey. In many instances, this is just a sensible matter of safety. So what would fall outside of these normalities? Well, of course, the big one is the use of a toilet. There's no getting away from it. People need to pee, poop, and generally relieve themselves. If at all possible, a self-contained portaloo within your vehicle is the absolute ideal. That prevents any general concerns, even if only for emergencies, really, because whilst the UK has no explicit law around urinating in public, there are potential laws you could break in doing so. I believe the decision as to whether relieving yourself discreetly in a nearby bush is appropriate lies entirely on, well, where you are. If you're in the clear sight of a road, any buildings, any other vehicles, well-trodden pedestrian paths, just don't do it. Otherwise, well, just use your best judgment, I guess. And of course, the awkward question of, as for the number twos, well, there's no reasonable excuse beyond a bout of catastrophic food poisoning, really, for doing this in a public place. So just at best equip yourself with an appropriate solution just in case. Unless, of course, that public place is a public toilet, in which case, go for it. And of course, in any case, whatever you do, if there is any signage, genuine or otherwise, saying something to the effect of no camping, no overnight parking, or anything else that suggests you just won't be welcome in that area, don't stay there. You're out to enjoy your day, not to ruin someone else's. You don't know what they've had to put up with in the past. Just move along. Right, that's the boring stuff out of the way. Let's get on with it. How to identify potential wild camping spots. So first up, I'm going to look for appropriate places to stay in the Yorkshire Dales. It's a few hours drive from my house, so perfect for a weekend in the wilderness. My first point of call is to trawl through my preferred apps of choice that identify wild camping locations that others have previously used, logged, reviewed, and so on. The two apps that I primarily use are the ever popular Park 4 Night, number 4, since this is likely to have the most frequent updates to any locations, and the less easily filed Wild Camping EU or Wild Camping Moonfruit UK. Is a weird site. I'm not really sure what's going on, but these are two separate sites with what I believe is the same owner. I'll put links to all these in the description below, but in short, what they do is use Google Maps to index a vast array of locations segregated by type. So they show different maps for wild camping, pub stopovers, air style sites. If you don't know what an air is, by the way, it's a European concept and it basically means a free car park explicitly for motorhomes with some services, normally either a toilet or a chemical toilet emptying point or even just a tap. It basically is engineered for motorhome usage. There aren't many in the UK. There's a few in Scotland. They've started popping up occasionally in Wales. Just go and search it. But that's what I'm talking about when I say air. It's spelled AIRE. But yeah, this website also documents motorhome day parking locations and even cheaper, affordable campsites, all primarily in the UK, but they also do offer some European options as well. Should I not be able to find anything I like the look of on either of the two apps I've just mentioned, I've also recently started using two newer offerings in the App Store called Search for Sites, all one word, and Stay Free, both of which operate in a very similar fashion to Park4Night. I won't be using those today, hopefully, but just in case you can't find anything, give them a try. I should say I'll be using the desktop browser-based offerings for this video because I find it much easier to collate and investigate locations this way, and this is how I do it prior to any trips. The mobile app versions are in many cases more user-friendly and excellent whilst on the go, but overall a bit slower to compare a lot of different locations at the same time. So first off, we'll go to park4night.com, and the first thing I'm going to do here is ensure my language is set to English, as this is a French service in origin, and many times now I've jumped straight in, loaded it up, found a load of options, and then realised I've left it in French, and you can't easily change it once you're in, so not ideal. Next, I'll simply click the View Map icon below the search box, which goes to a new page and displays a full world map. I then zoom into the Yorkshire Dales, which doesn't actually show explicitly on Park4Night, so using Google Maps as a reference, I can see that I'm looking for the vast open space to the northwest of the city of Leeds. I then set my map to a relatively large area so the entirety of the Dales are in view, and hit the not so obvious Search in this area button at the top of the map. And immediately we're gifted with quite a lot of options. So what am I looking for here? Well, all of the different icons mean slightly different things. All of the P icons are a car park in some form or another. The little black tent icons denote an official campsite. The motorhome icons are for sites with motorhome services or airs, but in general there's a lot of overlap here, and many sites are not tagged with the most appropriate icon. So it's often just a good idea to have a stab at them all around of an area of interest and see what comes up. That said, we do have to start somewhere. So, first up, what to avoid? Well, if there's a lot of P icons in one area, that's likely to represent a large town, or at least a busy tourist area, so I'm ignoring any large collective of these icons. Next up, I'm looking for more natural areas, so the forest icon should indicate just that, and ideally I'm looking for a few within an easy driving distance of each other. Ideally nowhere near a main road, and preferably with not too much else nearby. With not too many to choose from in this area, I'm going to pick this set up to the south of Allendale, an area I already know to be particularly beautiful and full of, well, just nice nature things. Now, if my geography serves me correctly, we've actually strayed outside of our intended area of the Yorkshire Dales already and have actually ended up in the North Pennines, but no issue. It's broadly speaking within the area of the country I was interested in, and is still very much an AONB, or Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, so I'm happy with that choice. Zooming in, we have two locations around the town of Allen Heads, which I've just realised sounds like a tool, and two near Nenthead. Nenthead. So yeah, let's open up all of these options in new tabs. You first click on the icon, get a preview of what to expect. This will help identify any that are maybe immediately unsuitable. This first one has a bin, apparently, which is always handy, so that has potential. The second comes in highly rated, so again, definitely an option. The third has poor ratings, but I don't see an obvious reason why, so we're going to explore that one further. And finally, the fourth preview shows it's off a main road, which I'm not too keen on, but it is close to a pub, which I certainly am keen on, so we'll give that one a chance as well. So the first one we opened, it looked like the most remote, but is entirely on the road, even if not a busy one. I'm not a fan of this. Parking so overtly can raise more questions as to what you're doing and so on, especially if camping with dogs, as I am. It also raises additional questions of safety if a dog were to bolt off, etc. So we'll just discount that immediately and on to the second tab. This one suffers from the same issue in that it is very visible from the road, but that said, the lay-by is much further back and the potential for breathtaking views here looks very promising. There is also a lot of grass area nearby, which is beneficial for the dog, so I think we can keep this as a firm maybe. On to the third option then, with the 1-star review. From the photos here, it really isn't clear whether this is a good option or not. It's not evident how the locations of the two photos link up, so we'll definitely require some further research. The description has presumably been badly translated, as whilst the phrase "there is just a small nipple gene" is amusing, it's not especially helpful. So finally, the fourth location on Park Fortnite. This is the one I was hesitant about initially. Well, I'm pleasantly surprised. There's still some cause for concern, but it's not due to the main road, as the plot looks huge from the photograph. You could easily hide yourself away at the far end of the car park here and not be easily spotted from the main road. However, the large welcome sign on the entrance suggests this is a car park for a service provided by a particular attraction, and in this case that attraction is the Nenthead Mines. So I'm not absolutely certain that overnight parking will be permitted here despite its listing. So what do we do next? Well, first off, let's cross-reference this same area on the Wild Camping Moonfruit app. Firstly, I'll be looking for the same spots to see if I can glean any more information, and secondly, I'll be looking if there's any additional nearby areas worthy of consideration. Onto their site then, I'm going to select the informal / wild camping UK option from the menu, and then select the little full screen icon on the top right to open it up into a full Google Map tab with the information on it. Zooming in then onto the North Pennines using Allen Head as our target, we see about 5 locations of note. Instinctively, I don't believe any of these match up with our previous finds, but let's take a look. The first one does appear to be at a mine, but it's not the same one as before. So what we'll do now, since we want to scope this out, is start saving the provided coordinates to a fresh Google Doc, Word doc, or however you prefer to save your notes. On to the second location on this site then, and as you can see, this one does actually match up with one from Park Fortnite. It is the Nenthead Mines, the number 4 from Park Fortnite. So although there's no additional information on it, it is being presented on both formats, which strengthens the idea that it may be a very valid stopover. Next up, we have a vague description a bit further away called Nenthead RC. RC in this lingo means rural car park, so I'll definitely be grabbing the coordinates for that one too. It's also worth noting, if you're not familiar with coordinates, that they can be provided in 2 different formats on these sites, and often both together in this instance. You only need one or set or the other. If you copy the whole thing, it won't work. My preference is to use the simplified decimal version, as it's easier to type into a sat nav should you need to. The other 2 potential locations in this area are along the same trunk road. I suspect they'll be less appealing, but I'll add both to the list just for further inspection. So now I've also added all the coordinates from each of the Park Fortnite locations to my document. Now it's time to see what else we can muster, and that means Google Maps. Starting with the first Park Fortnite entry, you know, the one with the bin. As a bit of an aside note, it can really be difficult remembering which one you're looking at when you can't quite see them all side by side and all the info together. So it may be worth making little notes like the one with the bin along your coordinates to really help you remember which one is which. So yeah, the first Park Fortnite entry drops us here. It doesn't really tell us much other than it's on a river, which is kind of cool, but we need more. So the first check is to change the Google Maps layers option to satellite view and zoom in a bit. But as is often the case in rural areas, their satellite view isn't super helpful, and it looks like there's some larger buildings nearby, probably farming related. So let's see if we're lucky enough to be able to spot this from a street view. For those that don't know how to do that, you grab the little person icon in the bottom right of the screen, hover him over the map, and any area that highlights blue, you can drop it there and view the street view, which fortunately we can this time. This gives us a better insight. So from here I can see what I suspected in the lay-by is really close to the road. It doesn't look busy. There's a few cars and this little ATV on the road, so it's clearly used at least semi-regularly. The good news is those buildings look properly abandoned, but the spot is also down a gully, so the views aren't particularly special either. Overall, it's just not what I'm looking for. I wouldn't go as far to say that this is a terrible spot, especially if you're in a larger motorhome. There's these nice long bays, but it's just not for me, so it's off the list. So now we'll just rinse and repeat with the second spot from Park Fortnite. This is the one that was sat further back from the road with some nice grassy areas surrounding. The satellite view for this one does give more detail. It looks like a properly sized lay-by, and thankfully Street View is once again available. So what we can see from here, well, there's a sign for County Durham, which means this sits right on the county line, which is a novelty if nothing else. There is also a bin, which is a win-win, and the chance of a good view looks a lot stronger. It's important to remember that the Google Street View cars use wide-angle cameras, so items in the distance can often get flattened out quite a lot. I suspect the view from here is actually a lot more dramatic than these images suggest. One thing I did notice when going to Street View was this little circular icon appeared when hovering the little person. This represents a photosphere and means you can usually see a panoramic photo taken by someone else, not the Google car, and usually someone on a phone. This can often give a bit of a better insight. So this site remains a strong possibility. I'm not smitten with it due to it being easily visible from the road. And looking at the reviews on Park4Night, one individual gave it a low rating due to some suspicious activity from a motorbike and a potential attempted van theft. Now, is that a concern? Yes. But could it happen anywhere? Also, yes. I'd have no intention of leaving my van here unattended, so I'm not overly put off by it. Another person noted that phone signal was especially good, which is always a bonus, so it's still on the strong maybe pile, just, yeah. A small concern, nothing major. Park4Night spot 3 then. This is the one where I couldn't work out how the two images matched up, and we're back to unhelpful grainy satellite imagery. Once again though, we get both Street View and a photosphere, so plenty still to be learnt. As soon as we enter Street View, the lay of the land suddenly makes sense. The slim uphill track shown on Park4Night wasn't part of the lay-by at all, and is actually another very narrow road going off in another direction. More on that in a minute though. The actual lay-by itself is a lot less suitable than what we expected. It would almost always involve restricting access to the road in some way, which I'm definitely not willing to do, and the potholes are immense even by our terrible UK standards. So that specific location is a flat out no, even if it does look gloriously scenic from the photosphere. However, this does lead us down a path of investigation, and to be honest, this is often the way I end up finding the better locations, which is off the back of previously known ones. That single track road looks right up my street, to be honest. Almost no one will dare use it, so where does it go? Looking at the satellite map, it isn't just an access path for a farm or a house as I'd have suspected, but it's actually a connecting road. Looking further west on it, the road widens a little at times, but alas, there is no safe place to stop on here, so we're going to have to leave it, unfortunately. But it could have made for a fantastic stopover. Maybe it's a route to explore on the way there to a different campsite. On to the final entry from Park4Night then, and this is the only entry that was on both maps, the Nenthead Mine car park. Instantly, from the satellite view, I'm put off. This is undoubtedly a rather built up area, but there was promise of a pub, so let's not write it off just yet. The good news is, when jumping into Street View, there's no properties immediately overlooking the car park, though there is a play park. Street View confirms what we thought about the car park being large and would possibly be very far from the road. But that building, presumably part of the visitor attraction, is a little off-putting. It's not clear from the signage whether overnight parking is permitted, so I think I'd leave this one as one to investigate on arrival. The key to wild camping really is to have a number of preferred spots, so in the event that one isn't what you'd hoped, you know where you're going to go next to try. This is the sort of place that if you rocked up and there was signage explicitly permitting camper vans, or there was someone to talk to at the building to give you the all clear, then I'd be all for it. But there's no point parking here and having a few in the pub down the road if you're then likely to be asked to move on. Needless to say, there's a lot of issues to consider when it comes to having a few beers and being effectively in charge of a vehicle, but that's a whole separate video. Just needless to say, it shouldn't be done. So then, we have two maybes from that set. Let's see what the wild camping site has to offer. First up, the other mine car park. Straight off the bat, we can see there's a huge number of photospheres on the map here, meaning it's likely a very heavily visited by tourists. What is interesting here though is that we can get Street View right through to the heart of the attraction, and as a result it goes all the way through the car park. This means we can sneak a peek at the signage. There's no mention of car parking charges there, though these images were from 2016, so that may have changed. The road signage states that dogs are welcome, which is always nice to see, and this location, to be honest, is very much on par with the previous one. If there was some acknowledgement of it being allowed to stay overnight, then it seems pretty good, especially as it's further away from the main road than the previous, but it is lacking the pub, so as I say, a bit 50-50. On to the next one. So this is the Nenthead Rural Car Park, and immediately this looks promising. The satellite view shows the coordinates being really quite far away from the road, and the street view shows, well, not a lot. It's desolate. There's nothing more than a couple of farm buildings in the far distance, a solitary gate on the car park itself, and a single cyclist. This one really is ticking all the boxes for me, if nothing else for being the perfect backup location. The only thing that stops this being a properly top tier stopover is that you can still be seen from the road, but I don't think that would likely be an issue at this location. And with that, we're on to the final two, both along the same stretch of road labelled as Burnhope Moor. The first is a slip style lay-by with a barrier from the road. It's not unpleasant, but the lay-by looks slim, so slim that you could easily become blocked by any other vehicles pulling in. Plus the proximity to the road itself is less favourable than many others, but what a stunning morning view that could be though. Again, maybe somewhere to stop and explore en route. And the final one, it's very interesting on first glance actually. The coordinates are very far from the road, which is always a nice surprise. However, once we get to street view, we are presented with a gate blocking access to that point. So one of two things have happened here. Either that area used to be or has since become accessible since these photos were taken, although I think that's unlikely. And what has actually happened is someone has stayed in this small lay-by on the opposite side of the road, which for obvious reasons just doesn't appeal to me, but has actually ended up with the wrong coordinates when looking them up. So yeah, an absolutely stunning viewpoint, but just not the right place. So where does that leave us with a decision? Well, honestly, when setting out for a wild camp, I try not to set my heart on one particular location, as all too often they aren't viable for one reason or another. That said, sometimes you find one so perfect, like I did in Scotland a few weeks ago, that sometimes you just have to hope. But for this trip, well, I think it's clear. I think the Nenthead Rural Car Park is the obvious first choice, especially if a night in the wilds is what you're truly after. That said, when using a wild spot, I'd recommend never stopping in the same place on consecutive nights, and if you're driving for more than a couple of hours, then I think a 2-night adventure is probably warranted. So I'd likely be headed up to that one for the first night, and then hope to gain permission to stop in the Nenthead Mine Car Park for a second night to make use of that lovely sounding pub before setting on home. And of course, keeping all of the potentially viable locations GPS coordinates with me, just in case any of them didn't quite turn out as expected. So if you have any questions about wild camping in the UK, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer directly or make a video about that particular topic. That really was quite an in-depth video, so as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you will be so kind, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.